It's an interesting time in our history because as one occurrence takes place, another happens in our nation and juxtaposes the former. It can leave many of us at odds with ourselves, not knowing whether to be happy or sad. Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, also known by the acronym of AAPI, have been subject to covert and overt racism throughout U.S. history, but there has been a significant rise in hate crimes towards the AAPI group as a result of false rhetoric and stereotypes perpetuated about them during this pandemic, which has essentially demonized Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. Whether we have employees who are part of the AAPI group or not, it's important for companies to send internal messaging to our employees that we have a zero tolerance policy for any type of prejudice and racism, especially in the wake of these incidents. For organizations who are afraid of relaying empty words, why not follow up with a discussion with your employees? One thing we can discuss is how microaggressions, which are subtle and quote unquote innocent comments and actions rooted in stereotypes and biases, have fueled the increased marginalization of Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. For instance, the notion that the AAPI group is the quote unquote model minority is a microaggression because while it seems like a compliment, it's incredibly insulting. It minimizes the discrimination that the AAPI community experience, positions them as a threat to all other people of color, and dismisses their struggles. This is just one type of microaggression that allowed our nation to overlook or dismiss the growing prejudice towards the AAPI community that was further exacerbated during the pandemic. Another group that's been further plagued by the pandemic is the unauthorized immigrant community, particularly stateless persons and undocumented immigrants, more specifically dreamers, of which I was part of both categories for 11 years. At the risk of sounding political, I think that our human resources and or people teams and our organizations should be familiar with the nuances of immigration because it can significantly impact our employee base. And I'll tell you how. Stateless persons and undocumented immigrants experienced job loss, contracted and died of COVID, and were displaced at all related to COVID at a disproportionately higher rate in the US. Because I was once stateless and undocumented, this hits close to home. Like other people in these categories, I was a victim of circumstances that left me without a family. No country wanted me, not even my birth country, and I was a minor. I cannot imagine having to go through all of that hurt and pain, and then to top it off, having to navigate a pandemic. That's why I am actually really happy and relieved to announce that the Dream and Promise Act, also known as H.R. 6, passed the House of Representatives and is under review by the Senate. Unlike DACA, this bill captures a wider audience, including the 3.9 million people like me, who are dreamers who wouldn't qualify for DACA. Second, it captures two other groups, temporary protected status holders, TPS holders, and deferred and enforced departure, DED holders. Both groups have had temporary relief in the US since the Bush administration, but without this bill, their status is questionable. H.R. 6 also captures the 700,000 DACA recipients and gives them a path to citizenship, where DACA only offers temporary relief that expires frequently. Lastly, this is the only bill that could help some stateless persons who have very little legal recourse with a path to citizenship. If our employees are not directly affected by this bill, then they have friends or relatives who are. Their personal experiences directly influence their level of engagement and output at work, so organizations should at least have awareness about this bill. Also, we have an opportunity to equip ourselves with knowledge as a human resources team, especially if and when our employees who are on various visas inquire about how they might be impacted by the Dream and Promise Act.